going to have to live with this pain because he had this heart that they didn't think could go through this back surgery. So I'm with Fred Loop, who's now deceased, the president of Cleveland Clinic. And one thing great about the Cleveland Clinic, they have no shortage of talent and no shortage of confidence. So I'm sitting next to Dr. Loop, and he says, "What's going on?" I said, "Hey, my dad was supposed to have surgery, but they said he can't have it. They don't know if he'll survive the surgery." And Dr. Loop said, "We can do it." Then he said, "What type of surgery anyway?" And he actually went to the Cleveland Clinic. Ian Kalfas did the operation on him, and they actually had a cardiologist with him in the surgery room, so if they needed something, he'd put in a short-term stent to get him through the surgery. It was sort of a remarkable thing. And my dad woke up the next day, pain-free for the first time in a lot of years. Sir, you have to get bad notices sometimes, but at least you see instant results. You renovate a building, you see some pretty quick results. Today, for the first time, I was in the new Clark Partington Law Offices in the new office building next to the YMCA. And it took, we started it maybe a year ago, but you go in and everybody's excited, you see instant results. You go to the new YMCA and you see all these people walking in, went from 13,000 visits to 34,000 visits, you see instant results. So not everybody can do what you do, which is really the long-term initiative to changing lives. Now we're trying to do that a little bit at the Student Community Institute because we have a great challenge here, and you know it more than almost anybody. And Take Stock does something that it provides somebody that sense of hope and promise, and it also takes away an excuse. I won't be able to go to college. I won't be able to do this. Well, yeah, you will, because you have the funds now to go do that, but you still have to work to get there. But we do have a lot of challenges. So let me talk a little bit about some mentors in my early life. And they were paid to be my mentors. They're called teachers. But they're really probably the most vital mentors that I had early on in life. And also talk about maybe some of the things that when you are challenged, and you know our challenge, but I want to go into why what you're doing is so vital, because we have to play catch up a lot in this county. We're playing catch up all the time. When you have one third of your children not ready for kindergarten, you're in a constant catch up role. And actually the odds are against these children when they're not ready for kindergarten. So catching up is not just easy. The fact that when a child enters kindergarten, they're not ready, there's a great chance they won't make it through high school. Now, if you're a male and you don't graduate from high school, there's a 60% chance that you will be in jail at some time in your life. If you're a female and you don't graduate from high school, there's a 70% chance you'll have a baby by the time you're 18 years old. That's generational poverty that Escambia County, Santa Rosa counties been dealing with for decade after decade after decade. And sadly, what I love about what you're doing is you're partnering with our public school teachers. Because our problem's never been public education, but I would have thought it was. I said this in Atmore last night. Somebody who asked me 2-3 years ago, what's our biggest problem? I said, high school graduation. High school graduation rate, 66%, 2014, that's our biggest issue. And then so, well, it's really then 4th grade math or 3rd grade reading, boom, boom, boom. And then Reggie here from Student Community Institute will tell you, we did this study and we saw only that 66% of our kids are ready for kindergarten. So we said, could there be a combination between high school graduation and kindergarten readiness? You don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence. So we went up and found a woman named Dr. Dana Suskin from the University of Chicago. We brought her down here to educate us. Over 300 people showed up at Booker T. Washington High School, which is pretty neat. And basically, she just changed my mind. It was a paradoxical change in my mind. I walked in seeing life one way, and I walked out seeing it the other way, because it was just that moment of clarity that hit me, that if we don't get these kids ready for kindergarten, and we even have to go before VPK. Yes. Even though VPK is vital, if a child goes through VPK here, there's an 80% of them are ready for kindergarten. If they don't, only 60% are ready for kindergarten. But some of it's a little skewed data because people that put in VPK might be a little more motivated anyway. So all of a sudden, wow. So what Dana said was 85% of the brain is developed by age 3. Well, it makes sense then. We've got to really get into these children before they're even in the age 3. And it changed my whole mindset. And once I get into something, I really get into it. And so I'm getting my hair cut one day, and this fellow that cuts my hair, Hurst, says, "What are you working on right now?" And I said, "Getting these kids ready by the age 3. 85% of the brain is developed by age 3. It's all about getting them and how many words they hear. It's all conversation, all those things." And all I ended up doing was saying by age 3, this poor lady next to me looked at me and said, "I have a 4-year-old daughter." And I said, "It's too late." But you know, it's not too late. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to be that emphasis that makes that difference. Your gap closers are what you are. Because if there's not mentors, we don't close that gap. Because every teacher is going to do the best job they can do for that child. But if you think about it, why it's not, our public educators, particularly in Escambia County, carry a bigger weight than they do in some other counties. If you've got 1/3 of your children not ready for kindergarten and you're a teacher, and I've asked teachers, where do you spend your time? They say, well, you have to spend on these kids that have to catch up. So guess who doesn't get the time? These other children also. So we'll never fix that gap just with education, because if we would have fixed that gap just with teachers, we wouldn't have the gap. So the fact that you mentor, you're the gap closer. You're the person that makes that difference. You're the person that's going to help that little bit of catch up that we have to do. And you're that person that's sometimes going to show them what normal looks like, because maybe they don't have normal sometimes in their environment that they're in. If you've never known what normal looks like, you don't know when you're in an abnormal situation. You just think that's the way it is. I was talking to a doctor who was struggling a lot with a number of issues, and we found out that he grew up in an alcoholic home. And the reason he thought he was so smart is because he was afraid to come out of his bedroom at night, so he sat in there and read all the time because he was afraid to go out. Now what I'm trying to say is he did not know what a normal childhood was until later on when he crashed, when he became a doctor, had the right wife, the right house, the right car, the right kid, and he wanted to blow his brains out because he still wasn't happy because he grew up with the feeling that I'm just not worthy of this no matter how hard I work. So let me tell you about a few of my mentors, and you're their mentors. Might be a little bit different, so please I ask you to relate, not to compare. Probably my first biggest impact person I ever had was Mrs. James. Mrs. James was a 3rd grade teacher at Congress Park Elementary School in Brookfield, Illinois. And I couldn't read. My 2nd grade report card said we will pass him on like 6-week trial, only because my mother had become secretary of the PTA. And that's how I got into 3rd grade, okay? And if Laverne knows my mother, she probably took, anyway, she got me into 3rd grade. Anyway, but they were only giving me a 6-week trial. Well, Mrs. James figured out something, what you figure out with the kids you mentee. It's what are they passionate about? Because people will try a little harder if they're passionate about something. And she knew I love sports. So she didn't bring out the reading books to teach me to read. She brought the Chicago Tribune sports page. Because if you want to do something and you're passionate enough about it, you learn how to do it. It's sort of amazing. I taught special needs children, and one of their dreams is to drive. Many of them will never drive, but there's a few, depending on the level, that learn how to drive. When they got their driver's license, it changed their life. Like everybody else, they can go to work. Do you know those children that had the potential, 100% of them could pass their driver's license exam? No matter how hard it was to read that book, they would get through that book because their passion was just that strong. I love sports. Mrs. James went and we read the Chicago Tribune sports page. I'm reading Jerome Holtzman, the sports columnist, in 3rd grade. Now, I also became extremely good in math, because if you love sports, you're going to learn math. You're going to learn all about it. Mrs. James also did something else, just like you do as a mentor. She set me up for success. I talk to my Major League Baseball players when they come through the Wahoos. Not that with us, we're minor league, but we have a lot of Major League players at Scouts. We had Tony Russa here last year from the Hall of Fame. We have Barry Larkin here from the Hall of Fame. You know, they come to games and I'll say to them, who were some of the greatest managers in Major League Baseball? And they mentioned Bobby Cox right off the bat. The longtime Atlanta Brave manager, right off the bat. And I say, why did you like Bobby Cox? He said, he put you up in a place to succeed. So they'd say, you know what? I want to play every day. but I thought I could hit lefties and righties, but Bobby knew I couldn't hit lefties, so I played with hit righties. Because of that, I probably got to play 5 more years because he set me up for success. Mr. James put me in a school play and I had a speech impediment. I couldn't say a lot of words. So you always wonder, why would Mrs. James take a kid with a speech impediment and put him in a school play with a talking part? Because I've been rocks and things like that in school play, not like a talking part. And she wanted me to learn how to use the word pour. So she said, it's like pouring milk. So my line, I still remember, was I'm as poor as ever. Now even today when I say pour, I can't help thinking about the milk that gets there. But my mother was sitting second row from the windows, third seat. And I remembered my mother watching me say a few words in a school play, and that was a good day for me. It was even a better day for my mother. What does every mother really worry about? How my child's gonna do. My 6th grade teacher, notice I didn't mention 4th and 5th. My 6th grade teacher was Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry, I could tell, liked me right off the bat because he slid my desk right next to his. We co-taught that entire year. Because he knew I needed extra help. He knew I had to keep me focused. Because in 5th grade, they said, doesn't pay attention, disrupts the class, blah, 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 blah. So he had me back there. Whenever I needed extra help, he just gave it to me. And every time he saw I wasn't paying attention, he'd say, do this, do that, do this. The other thing that was interesting is my mom came back from my 6th grade parent-teacher conference, and those are things I'd act like I was sleeping when she got home. So she wouldn't wake me up. Maybe a night would make it a little better. And she came home so excited because she said, Mr. Fry liked having you in class. He said, you have a bundle of energy. We just got to keep moving it in the right direction. That's pretty cool. My 2nd grandson, Caden, has speech impediment, and he had a real rough time. He was going to these, with kids, because they tease him and he hit him. He got kicked out of one, daycare center, because they couldn't control him. Got kicked out of, learning how to swim class. And so he got put into special education for talk and learn. He went to Roosevelt Elementary School in Janesville, Wisconsin. He didn't want to go to school. Didn't want to do any of this stuff, but he went there. And my daughter Becky went to pick him up one day, and the teacher assistant brought him out and said, I really like having Caden in my class. Guess what my daughter did the whole way home? She cried. So one of the great things you be as a mentor is you can look for what's right, because you don't have to sit there all day and correcting what's wrong. You can build on the positives, because let me tell you, these kids hear enough of what's wrong, specifically in the United States of America. Years ago, Gallup did a study of parents, and they gave parents from 43 countries the same report card, said, pretend this is your child, tell me what you would say. In 42 out of the 43 countries, the parents started on the positive side. There was only one country where the parents went right to the negative side. Anybody want to guess what that country was? We look at too much of what's wrong instead of what's right. Now, the person that was probably my biggest mentor was my soccer coach. I went out for soccer. I wanted to be an athlete, and I heard they weren't cutting. It was a brand new sport in 1965. I went out, and right away I missed the ball. And Coach King goes, way to hustle. Good job. Way to get over there. Next time, put your foot out. But you did a good job. What Coach King figured out how to do is how to correct without hurting. And isn't that what we all need to do? How to start off with what's right instead of what's wrong. So I played soccer my freshman, sophomore year, and my junior year I got cut. In my junior year I got cut. Now I'm not doing well in school. The thing that I sort of liked I wasn't doing anymore. You already feel like you're a loser, now you've been cut from the soccer team. And then life changed my senior year. Lee Benesack called me, soccer started before the year, and said, Coach King wanted me to call you and tell you he'd like you to come out for soccer. I said, Coach King's this freshman, sophomore coach. He said, no, Coach King's the new varsity coach. He told me to give you a call. Call changed my life. I went out for soccer. Not a big deal, but it was to me. I got a letter. I wear that letter sweater every Friday. In fact, years ago when we first moved to Gulf Breeze in 1996, I graduated in 69. I was telling my wife there's some stuff that we should get rid of because we're not using it anymore, particularly baby stuff. Why we keep moving this from house to house. We're not having any more children. So I said, I think we should get rid of it. She said, fine, put your letter sweater on top of it. We still have baby stuff in my letter sweater. So then I'll close with the story. So I go to college, and they asked me what I want to major in, and I don't know. My dad didn't go to college. My mom didn't go to college. I didn't know what to major in. And finally, I think of Mrs. James, Mr. Fry, and Coach King. I said, I want to be a teacher. Then they said, what do you teach? And I'm a little worried because I don't spell. I can't spell. There's many things I can't do. And don't you have to write on a chalkboard? But I thought about Coach King, because Coach King let me come into his classroom my senior year and be a teacher's assistant. And Coach King taught the special education children. When I taught them, I felt better about me. For 10 years that I taught special education, people would say, it must be great to teach special education. How do you do it? I got way more from them than they got from me. That's why if you go to a Wahoo game, we're one big job development center. By the time you sit down, you've seen 4 people with special challenges already that you have touched with, whether they're at the ticket or getting you in your seat, because we're all in this together. So yeah, you mentor different than maybe Mrs. James, maybe you're different than Mr. Fry, maybe you're different than Coach King, but you don't really mentor any less importantly. You make an unbelievable difference in people's lives. So, let me close with this last little story. People ask me, did I ever meet Mrs. James, Mr. Fry, and Coach King to tell them these stories? I said, I've never found Mrs. James or Mr. Fry, but I did find Coach King, but I didn't find him. Years ago, I was asked by Palmetto Healthcare to speak in Asheville, North Carolina at the Grove, and they said to me, make sure you tell a Coach King story. When I told my Coach King story, Coach King walked out on the stage. Pretty neat. When my oldest daughter got married, as the ceremony was wrapping up, the priest said, when you throw a pebble in a pond, how much water does it impact? And I was sort of tired of the wedding by then. And I'm thinking, who cares? Who cares? And then he walks down, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you could call on Father of the Bride. And how much would a pebble in a pond impact? Now I'm thinking I should have paid attention. Did he say how big a pebble was? Did he say how deep the pond was? And all of a sudden he goes back up there and he says, when you throw a pebble in a pond, it impacts every bit of water. And I would have missed it. See, Herbert Spencer says the best way to keep ourselves in darkness is to have contempt prior to investigation. And sometimes I can jump to a conclusion before I've really done the investigation. And he said, if you're at this wedding, you've made an impact on this bride and groom, even if you don't think you have, because you're at this wedding, you were invited. Maybe you touched your child who knows them, and that's why you're here. And he went through all sorts of analogies, not telling us we sometimes have an impact on people we don't even know we have the impact. And if you had heard me speak before that day, I didn't ever talk, and I'd spoken probably for 5-6 years. I never talked about Mrs. James. I never talked about Mr. Fry or Coach King because they weren't top of mind. But that day, they became top of mind, and I still talk about them. I'd love to tell you that it's all going to work great. I'd love to tell you that your mentors and mentees, if you know this, are going to just boom, boom, boom. But it ain't going to happen because you're gap closers. You're dealing with something that sometimes they go home and it's a whole different world. You're going home with challenges that we can even imagine sometimes. Reggie's now in the Student Community Institute. We're sending people into the apartment complexes to work with mothers of young children to get the brain going. Because children are hearing not more words, they're hearing less words now because parents are on the phone sometimes instead of talking to their child. So you're the great difference maker. You're the gap closer. You know what? You're that pebble in that pond of life. You're somebody's Mrs. James, you're somebody's Mr. Fry, and you're somebody's Coach King. But never underestimate the Jamaican people's lives, even if they can't tell you. Someday, somewhere, somebody like me will be speaking to a group of people, and they'll be talking about somebody that made a difference in their life, and it'll be you. Thank you very much for allowing me to do that.